All right, everyone. Welcome to today's Coach Spotlight interview. Today I'm joined by Morgan Curtis. And what we're all about in these conversations is shining a spotlight on all of the many different ways that coaching can make an impact towards the better world that we all know is possible and want to see happen. So Morgan, thanks for joining.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Really
Yeah.
glad to be here and be part of this community.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So I'll start by just saying a little bit and bragging a little bit on Morgan, and then we can get into the conversation. For anyone who is here live, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat at any point. And yeah, Morgan, you and I have known each other for a while now, a long time, through social change work, community organizing work, intentional community work in the East Bay, living in our individual communities, co-ops that we're a part of. And so Morgan is a social justice giving coach, and she supports people with inherited wealth to take their resources and put them towards causes and movements that really align with their values. So really, for Morgan, it's all about redistributing wealth in service to the social justice movements, causes that are transforming our world right now, so that we can create a world and an economy that works for everybody. And Morgan, I just love your work because as long as I've known you, you've been living a life that's just so, every corner of your life is a demonstration of your values. And, it's like shows up in obviously your coaching work, it shows up in your volunteer community organizing work, in the way that you're really intentional about what you put your time and time into. And also just your personal life, you're living the world that we want to see in a lot of ways at 𝒂𝒏 Farm. So the intentional community you're a part of. So I just love it, love it, love it. And yeah, anything you want to say about yourself as we're getting into this conversation that you want folks to know about you?
Well, thanks for the introduction. And
yeah,
I'm sure we'll go into many places of the story, but I heard that part of the audience today is folks that are curious about coaching. And I'll just say that I ended up in the world of coaching kind of kicking and screaming, kind of like, I would never want to be a coach. Like, I don't think that support for our fellow human beings should be bought and sold. And I believe in a world where we just support one another. And yet here I am seeing this is the way that I can contribute. So yeah, welcome to everyone, no matter how you feel about coaching or its role in the world of trying to build. I'm glad that you made your way to this conversation.
Yeah. Oh, that's huge. Well, let's kind of use that as our jumping off point then. So actually, before we go there, I mean, I'm curious, even before you got into coaching, you've had such a strong calling in your heart to work for a more just world, a world that really works for everybody. I'm sure there's so many pivotal moments you could pull out in that, but I'm curious, is there one point in that story where you really were called to this path of service in this way?
Thanks. So I was raised in a white, wealthy family, and I can see my own face really big. Okay.
Here, I'll put mine back. It's okay.
Okay.
No worries. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, I was raised in a part of society, white, wealthy family that, had high expectations for me in terms of how I would participate in continuing the world in many ways that it already is. And somehow I was that 10-year-old kid who was really upset about what I saw happening around me in terms of just the unfairnesses of the world, in terms of what humans were doing to the earth. And so I was like that, just little kid who wouldn't stop complaining to everyone that would listen about how bad things were. But that really only landed in more understanding of what was happening when I was in college. I was organized to take part in a campaign for fossil fuel divestment at my university, and that participation in really a social movement for the first time led me to understanding a lot more of the social and environmental justice issues that I had kind of noticed as a kid from my position of privilege being intersected and being arising from some of the same roots of white supremacy, of colonization, of capitalism, an economy that privileges the few over the many. And yeah, that period in my life was one where I got to question a lot more of the mythologies that I was raised with and find myself really learning a lot really fast from being in multiracial and cross-class movement spaces. And so that was, yeah, once I found myself in that organizing world, really began to be in some questions about, okay, how is it that we embody the world that we want here in this work that we're, where it can feel like so much of a fight, where every campaign is struggling against systems of power that do want to take people out. And in particular, Black, Indigenous, POC, working class organizers, not so much myself, but witnessing just the burnout and the pain that can come from struggling against these systems. And so being in that and wondering like, oh, how do we build a culture of resistance, of organizing that can sustain people and help them feel like their belonging and their sense of purpose. And that was really what led me to coaching originally, was that question.
Yeah. And what led you, is that what led you to getting coaching in the first place, or taking courses, or even before you were considering being a coach? It was kind of like, how do we create this culture? I want some tools. Was that the...
Yeah, and it was seeing some people in my extended organizing community who'd been trained by ACE and being like, there's some way that you're like being that's intriguing to me. And like, what are you thinking about? Where have you been? What have you been learning?
Yeah.
And then like, oh, check this out.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I see in your journey so much. One of the things I admire in your journey so much is that you have a very thoughtful, well-developed political analysis that you've devoted yourself to, like learning from many teachers about like what is going on in the world and what can we do to create a more just world. And you've really intentionally, in many areas of your life, brought in spiritual principles and like, you know, the questions of how can we go about this in a really compassionate, life-giving way. And that's what I hear in your story, is there was like, you were encountering some of the not life-giving aspects of movement work, and also for the organizers, and also, you know, in the systems that we're embedded in. So out of that, I'm curious, I'd actually love to hear, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the no, I so don't want to be a coach. That's the last thing I want to be. This is like, I'd love to hear like how that started and then what shifted at some point about that.
Yeah, well, I said a little bit about just kind of my initial like aversion to the word coach. I'm just like, ugh. And part of that was this feeling of like thinking that a coach was someone that like offers their own wisdom or tells people what to do. Just like, oh, I would never want to be telling anyone else what to do. And so why would I want to do this? And another part was the economic piece of like, oh, I don't think people should have to pay to get all the support they need to flourish as humans. I believe in communities and eldership and mentors and like just robust communities of support. And And it was in a coaching session with you, Jeremy, that I first saw that I might want to be a coach. And it was in a conversation about money. And you had me empty my evidence box for everything I had ever believed about money. And I was just like, there is no just way to make money under capitalism. All money is poisoned and toxic. Like, I just like, bleh, like all of it. And you asked me something like, I just want you to go away and just come up with one or two ways like you might be willing to earn money. And it was pretty clear to me already, as someone that was in movement organizing spaces, that I didn't want to be paid by the nonprofit industrial complex, that I didn't want to be taking resources that are already scarce in terms of funding our movements. And so I was just like, oh, like I can't come up with anything that like will let me contribute in the way that I know I need to. And at the same time, parallel to all this, I'd been on a personal journey with my family and my dad in particular around redistributing some money that had been set aside for me to go to college when I was very young, which at that point came to about $350,000. I was working to redistribute that into movements and to fund the organizing and the land projects that I know that we're going to need to get through this time. And so I remember I had my phone out. I was like in my like memos section on my phone, like trying to do this homework that Jeremy had sent me. And it was just like one of those like moments where I was like, oh, of course I'm supposed to be coaching young people with wealth about redistribution. And I like wrote a few sentences about what that could mean and how it could contribute. And yeah, it just grew from there. It's like, okay, I'm willing to contribute in these ways. And this is a way that I could not only like liberate a lot of those resources that are stuck and hoarded towards movements, but like take a teeny tiny slice to like help me be able to keep doing that. And from that very moment, I was like, I really don't want to be that white girl profiting off reparations. How do I like structure this so that, yeah, more resources are moving out into movements than I could ever make happen as like a fundraiser or someone participating and organizing on the ground. And so, yeah, I know we'll get more into kind of how I structure the finances in a bit, but that was where I got to at that point.
Oh man, so inspiring to hear. Yeah, it's I just appreciate the moment that your values are guiding you just so clearly in this story, right? It's like, it's so important to me to do this in a way that empowers people. It's so important to me to find a way to really just like make as much of a difference as I can with wherever I'm putting my energy. And there's this one level of the game where it's like, I can't. There's a whole lot of no's in the space, right? It's not going to work. I'm going to do it in a way that's like recreating systems of harm, right? And then there's suddenly this like crack in that. You can see the light shine through, and it's like, wait, what if I could actually be making, like you put it perfectly, make even more of a difference than I ever could have, trying to do it at one level of the game. There's this way I can like leverage my my reach through this particular way, social, helping people distribute their wealth to the causes that really need it. So I love the creativity and the possibility. And to me, that speaks so much to what's available out of coaching, right? It's like, at first you don't see anything, right? And then there's this moment where some clarity or new possibilities emerge. So yeah, it's huge. And good job saying yes to it. Yeah.
Still saying yes to it. It's still growing and shifting all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so you're working with folks who have inherited wealth, particularly young folks who have inherited wealth. and who are wanting to figure out what to do with that. What are some of the common themes, or maybe even one particular story, if you have one, of what are the kind of things you support people with? Where do they come to you? You know, when you meet them, what are they saying about what they want to get out of working with you? And what are some of the places that they are at when you finish working with them?
Yeah, thanks. So no longer just young people. That
Great.
was where I started.
I got it. Great.
Now seeing that, yeah, that was my own kind of conversation of, oh, I couldn't possibly coach anyone older than me.
I got it. Perfect.
Having the experience that, yeah, I can.
Yeah.
So yeah, when folks first come to me, they've normally read my website, which is its kind of own political filtration process. They've
Yep.
like looked at it and been like, okay, I resonate with what she's talking about in terms of radically redistributing power and control over resources. And so when I'm first speaking with them, yeah, I'm listening for like that kind of alignment, like that sense of like, oh wow, like they've been pushed, politicized, challenged, agitated by this current moment in history to such a point that there's such tension between them, within them, of what they know is needed right now in this moment and how they're currently acting. And they're like, I have no one to talk to about this.
Yeah.
Often it's, my family does not share this orientation, and my friends don't share this access to resources. And so I feel stuck and alone in the middle. And yeah, often what's coming up are the feeling of needing to do it right. The idea that like, oh, I have to find like the perfect organization or the perfect movement or the perfect campaign to be able to make the most possible impact. And that whole conversation of doing it right stops anything from happening at all. Or it's a conversation with themselves about like spending and budgeting for their lives. If they start redistributing, are there changes they need to make in their own lifestyle about how they've been relating to money on just like a personal level? Often the answer is yes. It's also often tied up in folks' sense of just purpose and work and direction. Like, what are they currently giving their time to? Often to do this work and to like build authentic relationships with movement leaders, with folks in movement, to be able to hand over decision-making power, and requires time and energy and investment. And so having folks see like, oh, this is a part of my life that I want to dedicate energy towards, when previously it might have been something I was like pretending it's not there, and connecting it to like their own sense of like what I'm called to do with my life. It's often there's conflict with family or partners or people like financial advisors, people that are kind of hired to uphold the system as it is. And so working through, what do I want my relationships with all these different people to look like? What do I want the quality of them to be? Do I actually want to fire this person that's getting in my way of being able to do the redistribution I'm called to? And yeah, that piece is big. And especially I work with a lot of women and queer folks, and there's so many ways that the whole system of financial advising is like set up to be extremely disempowering and keep power in the people that are considered experts. And so, yeah, the coaching space can be one to be like, you can walk into that room and ask clearly for what you want and make it happen. So many other things. Those are some of the, as you were asking for. And And then you also asked where they end up.
Yeah, like what happens? What I'm appreciating about what you're sharing so far is like one of the things that you've done an incredible job of is getting really clear on who you're serving. I mean, and that was the premise for you wanting to get into coaching. You didn't just start with, oh, I think I want to do coaching and let me figure out who my ideal client is. It's more like you really started from impact. Here's the impact I want to make. And you started to see a way in which coaching allowed you to really make that impact that you wanted to make, which I love. So one of the benefits of you having a really clear ideal client is that they really do come to you for really specific concerns, challenges, difficulties. The coaching tools that you learn from ACE, are tools that can support kind of any internal worry and, any vision that someone's going for and any worry that they're coming up against as they're going for that vision. But you've narrowed it down to such a specific audience that there's these tendencies that you're talking about that are going to come up, especially around money, which is such a huge thing for folks. So yeah, I'm curious, what are some of the like results that you support people to produce? Like what's happening after they begin to have some breakthroughs with you?
Yeah. Sometimes I talk about my work as like preparing people to be fundraised, so that when someone comes to them and says like, hey, can you resource us $50,000 for this campaign or towards buying this property that's going to support our movement in this way, that the person who's been working with me can just be like, yes, like, yes, like I'm so ready. Like I've already set my own goal to move this money, and this is just an opportunity that is showing up for me to meet my own goal, as opposed to this fear that is trained into wealthy people that when someone asks you for money, that's like the end of the world. Just yeah, that moment of opportunity, and then folks being also able to proactively resource, both to give to formations like, for example, the movement for Black Lives, like big national formations where you just hand over your resources and movement leaders there make decisions about how that shows up on the ground, is one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, supporting people to move resources in ways that are particularly in response or accountable to harms their ancestors have caused. So, if you know that your family company, was in a certain city in the Midwest and fought against labor unions and underpaid a Black workforce over 100 years in that city, and then took all the wealth and left and dropped all the jobs, returning that wealth to that city and being like, okay, where are the Black-led, working class-led organizing formations, unions, like community efforts that I can resource, literally returning this wealth to where it was taken from. And so supporting people to do also that sort of research and get ready to show up to those sort of relationships authentically and in for the long haul, not just like dropping a check and bouncing, but being willing to mobilize their own networks and make things happen. And then I would say it's like those relationships that I was mentioning that are hard for people, whether with family, advisors, friends. I think a result of coaching is often just a feeling of more authenticity, freedom, like capacity to support one's friends and community members, to enter cross-class relationships and spaces more authentically and truthfully, and to see the work of organizing one's family as a long haul game, where you have to hold the commitment to the relationship at the center as you work towards some political goals.
Which I'm sure you've had a moment or two in your own life of learning how to do that.
Dad, if you're watching this.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Well, having supported some people, some of my clients as well on this topic, I know what I hear and what you're talking about is um, there's almost like two sides that I think are really familiar when it comes to money, and especially when it comes to wealth and what do I do with wealth. One is guilt for not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I should do something, or like should, or, it's kind of this tension that people are in of like, and maybe there's more than two sides to that. Probably we could have had a couple other dimensions to this as well. It's like, oh, I shouldn't do anything at all. On the shouldn't do anything side, there's all this guilt, like, oh crap, but I'm not doing it, or I'm not doing it right. And on the should do it, it's like I'm trying to do it right. And there's very little creativity in that of like you're saying, if someone comes to you for saying, oh, well, we need $50,000 to invest in this land for this movement project. It's like being between those two, there's not a lot of satisfaction, right? And then there's no impact happening because the money isn't moving to where it could really do some good. And the person with the wealth is stuck just, debating and sort of with internal strife instead of fueling something that can really do something good in the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, you just said it really aptly there. And I think that folks often are experiencing that, like guilt, shame, paralysis loop that has them stuck in a place of not taking action. And that it's the way that we have to move through that on some level. Moving money is like the very surface level of the transformation, and like beneath that is like white folks. I don't just work with white folks, but talking about white folks here, like seeing that like our own liberation is bound up in collective liberation, and like we are actually more free and more safe when our like Black-led movements are fully resourced. And so it's like, it's not even like giving away your resources so that you have less. It's about building the world that we all need, and just sinking into that, like fully believing like my security is in these movements winning, like, and this is what this earth requires at these moments in time, is for Indigenous, POC folks on the front lines of the climate crisis to, be leading the solutions that we all need. And so seeing one's stake in the release.
Yeah. I'm just loving this conversation because your skill as a coach in this area comes in large part from it's like the intersection of your coaching skill and your political philosophy is really part of what helps you coach someone, because you can be you're so much more prepared to help the person kind of access a possibility mindset around things. Like what you just said is a huge point, saying that this isn't about giving away. This is actually about all of us, collective liberation for all of us. That distinction comes in large part from all the like care and thought and time that you've put into, the political viewpoint that you've developed in your philosophy on justice, right? I just think there's so much value in coaches developing, bringing all of who they are to their coaching. And it's not just, oh, I have these coaching tools and great, I'm going to apply these coaching tools when I coach you and and that's the end of the story. There's this real whole offering that you're bringing forward for folks that you work with, which I think is of huge value to them. So
Yeah.
I
mean, I know I've put in some time and care to developing the stuff, but really it's just been like listening and it feels like doing what I was kind of asked to do. Like when I was a youth climate justice organizer, there was always that question of like, why are you here? Who are you? Who are your people? Like, okay, great. Here you are in this movement, but like your people are still out there causing all these issues that we're fighting for. And like that invitation for like, please go do the work with your own people. And me being like, I don't even like white wealthy people. I spent a long time trying to get away from those people. And I'm getting to the point where I could like love myself, love my family enough to be like, holy shit, we might actually have a role to play in like stopping the harm and contributing to the good. And so I don't think it's true that we can only coach people who are exactly the same as us, but I think it's important to be with that question of who are my people in whatever broad sense. And we have something to contribute in that way, in a way that others might not be able to access.
One of the questions in the chat is there a certain minimum threshold of clients' wealth that you work with?
Yeah. So folks kind of self-define wealth. I've worked with people that inherited like $30,000-$50,000 and considered that excess hoarded wealth that they wanted to redistribute. I had someone decide that they wanted to redistribute all their money down to $2,000. And then I've worked with folks with $50, $100, $200 million who are in a very different set of questions, but similar impetus towards redistribution. And so, yeah, it's like if folks find me and they feel that these questions apply to them, then I welcome them. And yeah, it's also been important for me to not be like, I want to make maximum impact by moving maximum dollars, and to like not believe that it's just about the amount of money that's being moved, but yeah, that like everyone has like their story and their position to be part of like a collective effort within.
Yeah, which points back to what I appreciated about what you were saying earlier, which is the money moving is really the surface level. There's so much, personal, systemic, societal, community level transformations that need to happen as well. So it's not necessarily the dollar amount that's where everything is happening.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I know you've from what I can tell, you've infused principles around justice, equity, inclusion to everything you're doing in every area of your life, in many areas of your life. It's very clear that like the focus of the impact and results of your coaching is really focused around justice. I'm curious as on maybe a more like close to home level when it comes to how you run your business or how you communicate about your business or what you do as a business owner. What are the other ways that you have integrated justice, equity, inclusion into business or coaching?
Yeah, I've never used that language, so I'm like,
sure.
But I think I can. I also never describe myself as a business owner. So.
Yeah.
But I think I can say some things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm also curious what language you would use for it. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I would say I have a coaching practice. I normally just say something like, I support people with wealth who are attempting to respond to ancestral harm through redistribution. And I mean, I would say one of my core practices in this work is to redistribute 50% of my income. And so, yeah, all the money that comes to me through this work, I send 50% out to Black and Indigenous led organizing land projects, and then also folks in my extended community mutual aid efforts, like direct one-to-one support. And yeah, that's been a core practice for this from the very beginning. As I mentioned, I have worked and currently with a number of clients of color that have inherited wealth, or near the beginning of my practice, I also worked with folks with earned wealth. And with that, whenever I'm in like a first discovery call with a potential client of color, I always offer to refer them to someone that does similar work to me, who shares more of their identities, and just check in with them about doesn't matter to you. And like, I want you to be able to let me know when you're noticing like my whiteness getting in the way of being able to support you. And that's felt like an important practice to begin with up front. I'd say another core thing is that I don't tell my clients where to give. I don't believe that white people should be directing the flow of wealth in that way. So what I'm doing is supporting them to see basically what they're already being asked to do in their community by BIPOC movement leaders where they are, to look at, what are the formations, people that they're connected to that they could be asking where to give, where are the places that they're already giving their time as an organizer that they could be giving, what are the national like activist-led re-granting organizations like Haymarket People's Fund or Resist or Social Justice Fund Northwest, organizations where you give them your money and then they have a panel of activists who make the decisions on your behalf. So I do point people towards things like that. But yeah, and that's been an important thing also that I think I got from my ACE training, is like being very clear that I'm a coach and not an advisor or a consultant. And so I'm never going to make someone's giving plan for them, but help them figure out what they need to be able to do that.
Yeah, which I imagine is very fulfilling for people, that at the end, I mean, it might take more work or they might need to call in other support, but at the very least, reaching out in their communities to understand what are they being called to, given their particular place in the world. And I could just, I'm guessing a little bit here, but I can just imagine that the end result of them having created it themselves, especially if it's through conversations with others, when they actually give, there's a real like clarity that's present. Like, yep, this is what makes sense, versus like, cool, I hired Morgan, I got a plan, cool, I guess I'll just go do the plan. There's not that deeper transformation that you're really wanting for folks and communities. So yeah. And I just want to highlight the principle that, it seems is guiding a lot of your work, which is listening. You've brought it up a few times now, and I know I've known you for a long time, so I've known that you approach the world in this way, but it warms my heart, that viewing point of like, okay, what are you being called to? What am I hearing from, the people who are most impacted by these systems? And listening and responding is really like this theme in this conversation in some ways.
Yeah, and I would say, my coaching practice is also informed by, some of the other modalities that I've been trained in as like a facilitator or even like a ritualist, and supporting people to, what does it mean to listen to your ancestors in relationship to this work? What does it mean to listen to the land? Like, what are you hearing when you just sit quietly? And so I'm also, blending that sort of work into this. And while on the what else do I blend in topic, I'm also supporting people a lot with genealogy and family history research. And the whole industry of genealogy has so many racist beginnings and has been a lot about proving purity and whiteness over the generations and belonging to a certain elite class. And what does it mean to actually turn that on its head? My dad sometimes calls this me searching for sin in our family tree, but actually that being like a really important practice in the time of like, what do you see about the harms that your ancestors caused, and what does that mean for you now? What is your responsibility, and what do you want the next chapter of this story to be? Like, if this is what has been, like, what comes next? And yeah, the last form of listening I would say I'm supporting people to do is also like listening to the money, like thinking about, if money has been stolen and hoarded and taken from certain communities, like one could hold a spiritual belief that it knows where it needs to go back to. And so thinking about, where is that pull there?
Mm, mm. I love it. I love it. Yeah. And I imagine it's very, I think this speaks to why it's so valuable to work with a coach in a moment like this, because everything you're describing, especially looking at ancestral harms, that's not easy. That is not a comfortable experience. And it's an experience that I think would be very normal for most people to shy away from, even if they had it in their heart that that was an important pursuit. And there's such value in the coaching relationship where you've got someone beside you, sticking with you, who sees who you really are and where your heart really is in this matter, who's not gonna, be judging you or evaluating you, and who can help you access your courage, the courage that it takes to look at something that's uncomfortable like that. And whereas I'm imagining the alternative, like without support, if you were like, well, I think I want to do this, I want to go research, I want to figure out, what am I called to, especially based on what my ancestors have done. And it's like, well, maybe that'll accidentally end up at the bottom of the to-do list, like most days, unless I call in some real support to help me bring all of who I am to that journey. So that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you introduced me at the beginning as social justice giving coach, and I've been calling it more and more ancestors of money work,
Mm-hmm.
naming that intersection explicitly, because sometimes people can find support around ancestry and it stays in the like spiritual or storytelling realm, and they can find support around money and it stays in the like spreadsheets, like strategic realm. And like, actually, how do we like see those things as necessarily intersecting and informing one another?
Yeah, that's huge. Well, let's talk a little bit, since we talk on all these interviews about the specifics of money, what you're earning as a coach, and it's doubly relevant given the kind of coaching you do. Yeah, I'm curious, how many one-on-one or group clients are you working with, and what are your rates for one-on-one coaching?
Yeah, I'm hoping you have this all in front of you so you
I
can
do.
I'm remembering it right. But I
Yeah.
think I have 12 one-on-one clients right now and 17 people in 2 groups.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have sliding scale rates based on people's access to wealth, and kind of the full rate is for folks that have more than $1 million, and that's $300 an hour. And then there's for folks between 200,000 and $1 million, I think is 200 an hour. And then for folks with under $200,000 is $100 an hour.
Yeah.
And then the group work also has a category for folks with more than 10 million in assets. And those are the numbers. Did I get right?
You got it. Nailed it. 10 out of 10. And there's the link. So yeah, and what's kind of your average revenue? How much have you earned from coaching over the last few months?
Yeah, I think you can imagine being someone that does all this money work that I love, spreadsheets and budgeting and all these things. So I think in the last 12 months, I brought in 38,000 from coaching. So it's about, 3,000 and a bit per month.
Yeah, perfect. And you said you give half of your earned income away, 50%. What are some of the causes that you choose to personally contribute to?
Yeah. So I actually have my giving on my website as like a accountability practice. So you can go to morganhcurtis.com/giving, and shows everything I'm giving to. Yeah, I just point to one story and organization I've been supporting as a group of Muskogee people who returned to their homelands in what's now called Alabama for the first time since the Trail of Tears. And they're building an eco-village on 1,000 acres of reclaimed, rematriated land that they're raising the children in their language and restoring native species. And I believe in these folks so deeply, and it was only after I committed to fundraising and starting to support their work that I learned that my ancestor was a general in the Second Seminole War that pushed the Muskogee people off their homelands.
Oh, wow.
Which for me was one of those moments of like, okay, like trust that listening, like when there's a clear call to be supporting something, even if you don't get to uncover the exact ancestral connection, though in this case, I did have the privilege to be able to. So it's been amazing to be supporting those folks in their really holistic vision for what land back and cultural revitalization can look like.
Yeah, that's huge. And wow, there's something very deep and spiritual about, like you said, listening to the money, and then you start giving, and then it's like, oh, well, there was a reason I was called to this. And yeah, we'll put the link to your website and to the giving plan in the description on the video and the recording on YouTube. Yeah. Where, on a more like practical note, your marketing is so clear, your website is so clear about who you serve. You know, we were talking about this earlier. People are self-selecting by the time they get to your website. It's like, it's very clear if by the time they read your website what the vibe of your approach is. How do your clients find you? You know, and I think I'm particularly curious in this case because I think sometimes if someone were like, oh, I'm just doing career coaching or something, which is a good thing too, but if it were a more broad category, I think it's maybe a little more, there's less taboo around searching out a coach for that, right? But because of the topic, sometimes there's that embarrassment or worry that comes up. So I'm curious, how do folks hear about your work?
Yeah. Almost all through like word of mouth. Like someone is either vaguely transparent about their story, or even if they only have one person they've confided in so far, that person somehow has like heard of me and sends them my way. A few like people that find me on Facebook. Well, I did have someone Google me, which was, they searched like giving your money away coach or something. I also, when I started doing this work, I knew of at least one other coach who was doing something similar, and approached her and was like, how do we work in collaboration rather than competition? And so we now have a circle of coaches who do like wealth redistribution work in different ways. And so we also refer people to one another when we see someone might be a better fit for a different coach. All sorts of ways.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think to me, to just go to kind of a tactical level, it really speaks to the value of having a clear and very specific and even narrow ideal client. Because I would make the case, I would make the guess that part of the reason you're top of mind whenever if someone does hear, you know, if there's one person with wealth and they confide in one friend, part of the reason I imagine that one friend remembers you is because it's not just like, oh, Morgan's a life coach. It's like, that's easier to like not make the connection that I should connect this person with Morgan, but because it's like, I know exactly what Morgan does, and it's a very specific thing, and it's not a fit for most people. But when I encounter someone who it is a fit, it's like, ding, you got to talk to Morgan, at least sign up for a newsletter or something, you know, at least you should be in her orbit, or possibly you should work with her. is, I think a tension that a lot of new coaches are in is like, okay, well, how do I get specific enough? Because I could serve everybody and I kind of want to serve everybody, or, I don't want to rule people out, or like the familiar conversations that come up. But I think what you're describing is like word of mouth works a lot better when people know exactly what you do very specifically.
Totally. And I started out with my own version of the big tent. It was like anyone with money.
Yeah.
And anyone with money who like is motivated by dismantling white supremacy and all the other political things. But yeah, it got more and more clear to me in the initial clients that came to me. Like, I was supporting someone whose ancestor had like set up a lot of the Black voter disenfranchisement in the Deep South. And so he was looking at, okay, how can I fund Black movement building efforts in the South that build political power to undo that legacy? And I felt myself being like, oh yes, like of everyone I'm working with right now, like your story, I just can't wait to support you. And so then it just got more and more clear of like, oh yeah, that sort of person who has a story that they know they need to respond to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good principle to pull out here. A good like tip or guideline is for new coaches, especially, or someone considering coaching, is like working with your first 3, 5, 10, 15 clients, each one listening for which one of these people are like, oh, I would love to have 10 more clients like you.
Mm-hmm.
And then choosing to focus your ideal client, your messaging publicly more and more around that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat. And feel free to answer this however you want. How has your family been impacted by your ongoing movement work? I'm sure there's probably all kinds of ways we could get into that, but anything you want to share on that?
Yeah. Be a whole separate call.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's been some really amazing moments where, my family, particularly my dad, has made some big moves in support of the world that we want to build that I never could have imagined he would have said yes or go for. And those have been incredible. And then, yeah, there's been a lot of hard moments too, where I've, pushed beyond what makes them comfortable. And particularly having all my numbers on my website is acutely embarrassing for my family. It's very impolite in their worldview to tell people how much money you have. But then in my extended family, cousins, second cousins, there's also been really amazing people showing up from different corners being like, oh my God, we love what you're doing. We have these same ancestors. What can I do? So,
yeah, that's huge. Yeah. Cool. Well, this seems like a good place to draw things to a close. Thank you so much. I love this conversation, and I'm excited for more people. Thank you everyone who was here live, and I'm excited for everyone to get to see it, the recording, who watches it. If folks want to connect with you more, how can they do that?
Yeah, website, my email, morgancurtis91@gmail.com. I see some people I already know. Hi, Karen. Hi, Misha. Happy to be in touch with anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
Though I am a big learning is like how to manage one's calendar when a lot of people are reaching out to you all the time. So that is something I'm still learning and need some advice about.
Great. And I just want to plug, in addition to publicly sharing your giving plan, you also have this whole resource library on your website of ways that people can give, places they can give, just ways of just different thinking, different modes of giving, basically. Really, really valuable resource that folks can check out. So that's at morganhcurtis.com, and I'll put that in the description below.
Just on that, I would say that, I have that resource library. I have a bunch of other like templates and worksheets and tools that I offer people. And, sometimes clients will ask, like, can I share this with my friend? And I just always say yes. Like, I don't want anything that I'm holding or offering to be considered mine. I'm just like, if you think that it would serve for you to go tell anyone anything about what we've been up to together, like, please take it and run.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been an important principle as well.
Yeah. Amen.
Mhm.
Well, this is great. And for anyone who's considering coaching, or for any of our coaches who are or graduates who are on this call, we have a couple of our entry-level courses, Mastering Life's Energies, coming up in July and September. And you can check that out at acecoachtraining.com if you have any of your friends you want to refer. So wanted to mention that. And Morgan, thank you for being here and doing this. Thanks for all the work you're doing in the world. It's really important.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for tuning in now and future watchers of the recording. Hello to you too.
Cool.